And we probably will share the recording on our Slack group on like a private YouTube link for anyone who's had a couple of people saying they bought tickets but then couldn't make it. So our discussion should last around 40 minutes and then we'll go into questions. But before we get into the discussion, I'll introduce our panel, let them sort of say hello and tell you a bit about themselves. So our first panelist is Patricia Gomez. She's building up content design at King Games in Barcelona and leading content ops there. So as well as managing the content designer, she's doing content ops. So I assume she's a very busy lady. Also, Patricia, you do have a bit of a reputation because when I posted this event, someone said, I love Patricia, she's a G. So I think that's a good thing. And so can you just say hello and make us all feel a bit jealous about how lovely Barcelona is right now?
Hello, everyone. Hello from Barcelona. Although today has been raining like a lot, but now it's sunny. We have like a doubling weather today. Anyway, yeah, so joining from here, Spain, I'm really glad to be part of this panel to share my experience now at King and previously in Adrian's and previously at Google.
Cool, thank you. We also have Connie Wu. She's product writing lead at TikTok, previously worked at Facebook, YouTube, and Google. I think I got that right. Connie, can you say hi and tell us how you've managed to acquire such an awesome CV as well?
Hi everyone, it's Joni. Nice to meet you all. Yeah, I really fell into it, honestly. I think like a lot of us folks, I had no idea what UX writing or content design was when I actually started doing it, and was just really lucky to find a role at Google, where I initially started working in UX writing and also help center content strategy because, you know, writers do it all, right? But yeah, now I'm at TikTok. I probably better known not for my career, but I have a corgi. And so when I'm at work, usually people recognize me because of my dog first. So
amazing. Oh, what's your corgi called?
Her name is Sneakers.
Good name.
Thank you.
Good name, very cute. And then we also have Joni Vanderburg-Paner, who heads up UX writing at Airbnb. And she's also led content at Facebook and taught UX content strategy at the University of Washington. So I'm actually really impressed they teach that at university in the States. Joni, can you just tell us a bit about yourself and where you're joining from as well?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I am joining today from Seattle. We're having actually a lovely sunny day here. Yeah, I've been at Airbnb for about 2.5 years. Was at Facebook, Expedia, and Amazon previously. I've kind of made the rounds. Yeah, teaching was really interesting. It was a master's in communication leadership program, and the students really loved learning about, you know, tactical ways to do content strategy because they had been taught theoretical ways, but we got them working on actual projects and stuff. And it was a really fun to see their minds, you know, light up and open up to the possibility that this could be a career for them. So that was probably the most rewarding thing I think about teaching. But yeah, thanks. Happy to be here.
Cool, thank you. Well, I'm happy that you're all here as well. So I guess let's just sort of dive into the questions. And as we go through, as I said, we'll sort of gather questions from the chat and we'll come back to those at the end. So I'm going to start with the theme, the sort of broad theme of gaining organizational buy-in for content strategy. And first, I would like to know how well the role of content is in your current organization. So I'm going to come to you first on this one, Joni.
Yeah, so I think getting buy-in, you know, can change with leadership sometimes. So we had a design leader for a long time at Airbnb who was a great advocate for us and helped us build out quite a sizable team. But now there's a new guy. And I would say I'm starting from square one a bit with him. You know, I find myself dusting off that iceberg slide that probably a lot of us have used to talk about what we do. the famous iceberg slide. But what has helped with him is talking, sort of framing it not as here's all the things this team can do, but more like here's all the things only this team can do, and really keying in on our unique, value prop, I guess, because then it becomes easier to have the conversation. If you care about XYZ, if you care about voice and tone, if you care about building content at scale, you need these people because they're the only ones doing that work. They're the only ones paying attention to these things. And that's really helped. And, I get kind of strict with the team about this as well. And I say to them, I know you can do marketing emails, but I don't want you doing marketing emails. I want you to focus on product writing within UX flows, because that's our unique leverage and how we have the most impact at the end of the day. So I think, so far that's been successful, but we'll see how it goes with this. With
early
this
days.
year. Yeah.
Early days. How about you, Connie? What's it like where you are?
Yeah, Joni, I was just gonna say, I've been thinking about creating like a UX writing content design meme account, and when you said iceberg slides, I was like, that has to but yeah, I totally like get where you're coming from, because I think for us, and when we work with folks that have worked with UX writers before, they see the value right away. We're asking questions that maybe they aren't thinking about, we're identifying gaps that maybe they haven't noticed. But when we're working with new folks, of course, we're sort of like re-educating, and that can be a little bit like there's additional labor I think writers often have to do. I think as like a manager, definitely for me to also find opportunities to build a relationship with some of the leadership, so that trickles down with some of those stakeholders, that has really helped as well. Like, so getting ahead of it and being like, hey, I really want to talk to you about what our team can do and how folks on my team can work with you, like that definitely makes a huge difference for us.
Is the content team quite relatively new at TikTok, or has it sort of been there since day one?
So when I joined, I was the first, which I feel like is another UX writing, like a story we hear a lot. So I think in the beginning, it was very much, hey, like, we're here, like, let's work together. We hear a lot of the like, yes, and kind of attitude. And then I think we're getting to the point where we're starting to have to scale ourselves, and to Joni's point, starting to say no to things or hiring more so that people can be a little more strategic and focused on particular areas of the product.
Yeah. And how about where you are at King, Patricia? Is how mature, I guess, would you say the company is in terms of understanding the role of content?
Well, in my case, when I joined King 3 years ago, I joined in the player support department as the head of content. So I was managing all the support content for King Games. And quickly, I realized that there were no UX writers in the company. And in fact, it was either the designers or the developers writing the copy themselves, and then the localization team reviewing the English copy before sending it for translation. And another detail is like, some or most of these designers or developers didn't have English as their first language. So you can imagine, the quality of the copy. So 2 years ago, or yeah, more than that, I had a chat with my manager and said, hey, I think that my team can have greater impact if we do the UX writing bit in Candy Crush. Would you let me try this one out? So can you cover me for a while until, I get like a case in Candy, and then, we can move directly. And this is what happened. In about 3 months' time, I started to get like a lot of requests from Candy, because actually the UX design team, they were eager to work with that. So it was like pretty, all these requests grew like pretty organically. And then I just started starting relationships within the different crafts and teams in Candy. So it's all growing in an organic way, and by building relationships with the key stakeholders.
So you all work for kind of pretty fast moving tech companies, and obviously you've all talked about kind of how you've managed to kind of become more involved and get your teams more involved. Have you ever had time to or have you had to sort of step back and, you know, create a strategy or vision to communicate sort of who your team are and why you're there, and what your kind of vision is, or has it just been kind of, you know, all hands on deck, straight off, just, you know, scaling so quickly that you haven't had time to do that? Patricia, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, and in terms of communication, it has helped me a lot to communicate the strategy and the OKRs, like on a one-on-one basis to each of the leaders, and understand and get their feedback and input, and trying to also understand what the OKRs are so that we can have some shared strategies as well. And also one thing that really helped us at the beginning when we created the craft, we ran a series of stakeholders interviews to understand how this each team was perceiving the content design team. And we came up with specific strategies to address or to improve the way they were perceiving us, and also put in place actions that will help us like build like a better relationship with each of the teams.
Mm-hmm. And Joni, you mentioned the like iceberg, the good old like iceberg meme, but like in all seriousness, I think sometimes that is quite useful in terms of like showing people the sort of breadth and depth of our roles. But have you also found it kind of helpful to create some sort of shared visions or strategies around content?
Yeah, for sure. You know, the team at Airbnb is fairly, I would say, mature. It's been around for I don't know, probably, well, gosh, Max would know, he's on the call. It's about 6 years. So we have a pretty robust you know, voice and tone vision, and I think that's where we lead and have the most impact there is to be the owners of voice and tone, and to drive the strategy for every project around voice and tone. But I wouldn't say we have like a separate content vision that's separate from design. You know, the design principles and design vision at Airbnb are very aligned. So we mostly you know, lean into voice and tone frameworks, content extensibility frameworks, and things like that, where we're really driving those approaches for each project. Yeah.
So I guess, like, I mean, I imagine it's fairly similar at TikTok. Are you kind of just more aligned to what the product's delivering than thinking about anything sort of more in isolation?
Yeah, we do also align across product and UX on our OKR. So a lot of our key results do roll up into the same high priority objectives. I think where we kind of start to fork off is to also think about kind of what Joni was talking about, a lot of our guidelines, our centralized resources, and kind of sharing our approach to content strategy through that. And so even those we recognize as OKRs too for our team. So when we're developing new resources, or, you know, making major updates to like a major audit or something, we think of those as content-led OKRs. So that allows us to kind of drive an OKR as opposed to only being aligned to what the product is kind of setting as the OKRs.
Yeah, I think it's tricky, isn't it? Because especially when your content teams, if you've got embedded designers that are sort of embedded in product teams, their kind of OKRs are very product centric, and that's fine. But then you sometimes need like shared sort of objectives across the team, and I think that's where those things like, yeah, like your frameworks and your guidelines, they're the things that as a team that you can kind of collectively own and have in your objectives. And I think it's kind of important to have I'd say like quite a combination of both. And I guess sometimes that can be a hard thing to communicate to your sort of leadership team, like why are you doing these things and these things, like you should just be aligned to product. Like, well, actually no, we're trying to like build a discipline here, and we're trying to scale, and to do that we need to have some of these kind of central foundations in place. I don't know if any of you have found that a sort of tricky thing to communicate the need for. No?
Yeah, I think I have found it tricky to have content specific OKRs, and partly, I think the challenge is I don't always feel like we have the right qual and quant just research around it too, you know. I struggle to how do you measure whether you have hit the right, it's actually one of my favorite interview questions, which is probably mean of me, but like how do you measure voice and how do you know you're successful with your voice and tone? You know, what's the measurement there? And we've experimented with a lot of things. I don't know that we've totally nailed it. I do think it takes a good researcher to really hone in on that. And good data scientists as well.
Yeah. Sometimes it's about like, I guess, like those brand equity driving things like consistency of voice and tone across a brand, which you can't necessarily say is driving, like you said, any sort of quant metrics, but you know, it's just the right thing to do to drive quality and brand perception. So kind of comes back to that, like, yeah, it's tricky to measure, but I like that. I actually like that you put that in an interview. I think that's a good question. So I guess, like, yeah, it sort of leads me on a little bit to my next question, which is what kind of work that your team do to help product design teams adopt content design as sort of an integral part of the design process, rather than, you know, just something they're sort of tagging on at the end. I'm going to start with you on this one, Patricia.
Yeah, one initiative that has helped us to actually embed into the design process has been, well, convincing Candy Crush to move to Figma. Because last year, each team or each person was working in a different design tool. Imagine that. So all the documentation was scattered in different places, and it was really hard for my team to actually access the information or finding all the information.
Yeah.
So that's why we started that initiative earlier in the year to first identify that that was a problem for all the design teams. Yeah, so that was first identify that was a problem for all the creative teams within Candy, and then come up with the solutions, select the tool that fits our requirements, and then get the budget for it and get the contract signature process. And right now we are in the process of onboarding all the teams into Figma. And the good thing is that this is now an OKR in Candy Crush. So I'm really glad about that. And the good thing is that everyone knows that this was an initiative led by content design. So it helped us get like visibility in every discussion that we have. And also we are also part of the task force leading the migration to a new content management system that will hopefully be able to integrate with Figma as well, so that, you know, we can automate some tasks like keys creation, etc.
Wow, that will be super cool as well. You can get that working, integrating. I'll be keen to hear about that. How about you, Connie? How sort of I mean, I guess how embedded is content design in the design process already, or is that something that's had to be kind of worked on?
I think at this point they're pretty embedded, and I also notice a lot of times the writers or content designers are the connectors on so many projects, because we're thinking about content as a system. I think also naturally content is usually the smallest team, which is unfortunate. I think we want to continue to build the team, but at this point, they often tend to work on more things. So they sort of see content across the entire system a little bit more. Obviously, we also share a lot of content with each other through our content critique, basically. So we kind of connect the dots for a lot of our stakeholders too, where I think even sometimes they get pretty siloed when they're kind of working on different features. And then I think, yeah, to Patricia's point, I think Figma has really helped democratize a lot of the work, because the writers can pair write and pair design with their designers from the beginning. They're not waiting for a file, or even like the writer first creating an outline and throwing it to the designer. Instead, they can just both be in Figma or use FigJam. They're like brainstorm, what do they call it? Like a collaboration tool. So it's nice that they can just be there live together at the same time. And then actually, Patricia, I love that you called out the CMS, because that is something that we also have within TikTok. So we manage all of our UI strings in a CMS. So the writer actually owns creating the strings, which is really nice. if anyone's experienced like, you know, doing a huge audit and then like begging their engineers, like, please, can you update the strings, and just like the engineers not being able to prioritize it, like it's a little bit less of an issue here because the writers can actually go in and update strings independently, which gives them a lot more autonomy, which is great.
That's brilliant. That's really good. Have you got a similar setup at Airbnb, Joni?
No, I'm very jealous of your CMSs. I mean, we have a CMS for long form help center content, but that's it. Everything else is hard coded. So definitely feel the pain of trying to do an audit. That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Connie. Because the writer usually has 4 or 5 projects and the designer only has 1, you know, you really do sit at a little bit of a higher level and are able to connect dots. I've always found that to be true. We solve inclusion, writing inclusion through process, I think a little bit too. At Airbnb, we have a centralized intake where every time it comes in, it has to pass through me and then I assign a writer. So from the beginning, they know who the writer is. And yeah, definitely Figma has helped tremendously with this. They're in Figma all day long. In fact, we're even to the point now where we almost don't even do copy docs anymore, which sounds crazy because you don't need them in Figma. You know, the engineers just work off of the prototypes. So it's definitely helped us stay, you know, joined at the hip with our designers. Yeah.
Also,
The
you can
sorry.
push the strings directly into the CMS, either phrase or localized. So you don't need anyone to kind of like touch them.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's so good. I do think Figma should sometimes come with a warning, because I think the thing I've observed and actually experienced as well as a content designer is it makes it so easy to jump straight to kind of high fidelity mock-ups, and there's always a temptation for the product designer to just like miss out kind of the like more foundational like sketching or collaboration like journey mapping stuff and just jump straight into mock-ups, and then straight away I feel like it's constraining the thinking of the content designer or UX writer, because they're seeing like this kind of polished design and feeling like it's finished even though it's not. And I just feel like, although on the one hand Figma has made collaboration so much easier for content designers, on the other hand it sometimes like is a temptation for people to like skip the kind of UX design approach to product, you know, the UX design part of product design, and just jump straight into UI design. I don't know if any of you have experienced that.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think the other challenge with Figma is it drives me crazy is the designers will create a new file and you're like, okay, where is this thing now? You know, we try to get them to just to create a new page within the file so we can at least find it. But yeah, I mean, you have to have a lot of conversations like, where are we at in the copy process? Or this is FPO, or, you know, this is draft. This is, it to be really clear to mark things up in the Figma or put the alts to the side. You know, there's all sorts of ways you can do it. But yeah, I agree, Rachel. It is almost too easy to create high fidelity stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we talked a bit about kind of adopting, you know, content design and getting that embedded, but what about like, I'm sort of keen to know about the wider business and the sort of tactics that your teams use to maybe educate stakeholders or leadership, you know, other potentially like leadership teams even, in how kind of the value, well, not just the value of content design, but how it can help solve kind of bigger problems. Connie, I'll come to you for that one first, I think.
Yeah, I think, I know this one's obvious, but just building those relationships. So building strong relationships with product and design leaders is important. And then I know this is going to be another meme, but the roadshow. So I know probably many of us have seen or even put together a roadshow to kind of explain what content designers and UX writers do. And I think it also really helped for us to show a lot of specific examples to kind of show the breadth of our abilities and how we can provide a lot of value for different types of features and different types of projects, because there's a range of things. I mean, within content design, there could be naming, you know, there could be, you know, thinking through like a system, it could be a framework or information architecture. So since UX writing, when it's good, it's almost invisible. It can help to document kind of our frameworks, our rationale, our process, and helping stakeholders be bought into how we make those writing decisions, I think is really important. So it isn't so invisible. So they're not just taking it for granted.
Mm. Yeah. How about you, Patricia? Because I imagine like a games company, it's kind of, I don't know, I just imagine it's quite hard to explain what UX writing and content design is to some of the organization.
Absolutely, because actually UX writing is pretty new to video games companies. They're more used to disciplines like narrative design, and this is why I started. This is why narrative design was my first best friend in the company, because I identified that this role will actually help me to get into the right stakeholders. As for the education, I try to use every opportunity. I started educating my manager so that he would be able to talk about my team when I wasn't in the room. And then I started with the other discipline directors in Candy, first trying to understand what they do, and then explaining how my team can help them do a better job, instead of like showing this is what we do. Because actually by that, they were able to actually kind of like find a reason to work with us, because they were helping them do a better job. And I'm thinking, for example, we help the UI designers to upload keys to the CMS way faster, and just with that, we were able to kind of like catch their attention, and they wanted to understand more about how we work.
So it's like the kind of what's in it for you sort of angle.
More like I give you, like you give me.
Yeah. And how about you, Joni? What's worked for you at Airbnb in terms of kind of that broader sort of business education piece?
Yeah, I mean, plus one to everything Patricia and Connie said. The road shows and education are so important. I always also include a slide that shows, again, to your point, Rachel, like what do they care about? I always include a slide that shows how much money we made with an A/B test, so I'll put like our highest performing A/B test in there. And then when you do the math, what the conversion equals in terms of dollars. This was especially effective at Expedia, where we just really had that data. It was really easy to get that data, and so we did a content test one time where just slightly changing the verbiage around an insurance module equaled $25 million, and it was like, that was what the C-level cared about. And so, they start to see value in that way, because let's be honest, they like money. So that's a slide I always make sure and include in my roadshows.
Yeah, we had like a similar thing actually at one company I worked with, where we changed a button label and it had a 71% uplift in conversion. And it was just like literally a word that we changed. And all of a sudden, like it sort of just like clicked for some of the kind of product managers what content could do for them. And then after that, it's like, okay, we'll listen to you now. But it's just funny how those kind of like, one small thing can just trigger that thought for them, trigger that thought, oh man, like you say, money, that's what they're interested in. I'm sort of keen actually to know which teams in particular, sort of which discipline teams, or even like teams in other parts of the organization, have been the biggest allies for you in terms of growing content design. Patricia, maybe for you it is your kind of narrative team. Where did you start with at King?
I started with the narrative team. We created together the Content Hub, which is a place where we are putting together all the content resources. But also, I have friends in game design, UI, UX. Yeah, I'm just trying to be friends with as many people as possible. Yeah.
How about you, Connie?
Yeah, I agree with Patricia. UX is just so key in terms of being allies for content design and UX writing. I think actually it's been interesting because for us product managers definitely are just so invested in growing our team, because I think to Joni's point, when they see how messaging affects product experiences, they just get really, really excited. They see that there's so much value in terms of hitting their own metrics. So also partnered with PMs who asked us for support on like SEO and technical writing, which is something our team didn't have any expertise on. So we hired writers specifically with those skill sets to kind of bolster the value we could kind of provide as writers.
Interesting. See, I've always found like I always found researchers to be really like super helpful allies, because I don't know why, I don't know how I ended up doing this, but I ended up sort of saying, oh, I'm a writer, I can help you with your research scripts, and I can help you like synthesize all your information and turn it into a story, and I can help you with this, I can help you with this. And as a result, like I would get brought into the projects like early, because when they were doing the sort of initial research, the researcher would be like buddying up with me. So instead of like me having to like edge my way in and say, hello, we should be there right from the start, I was kind of just brought in naturally. So I've always sort of veered towards, in terms of getting kind of content design into the process at the right place, I've always kind of erred towards making friends with the researcher. But also, like, interestingly, you say product managers, because I did have a product manager once who realized that because content design, could help him to craft his like product visions and vision statements and all this sort of stuff, and it kind of like then became much more like open about bringing content as well as product design and research into like the product strategy, creating the product strategy and developing it, and then getting me to like help write it. So it's quite interesting, like working out who those people are that you need to sort of almost pay that extra attention to and get more invested in to help your team progress. It's kind of interesting. I wanted to know actually how I'm going to start. Actually, I'll start with I think I'll start with Joni on this one, but kind of how easy has it been to make the case to sort of scale your team as well? Because I mean, I guess you had an established team there at Airbnb, but we sort of talked earlier about making the case for more resource and things like that. But how have you gone about that at Airbnb?
Well, like I said, with this new leadership, it's definitely hard at the moment. And I think one thing we've done is brought on, well, we centralized recently. So now we're working on a design roadmap instead of a product roadmap, which is definitely a shift. So we don't do everything now. We just do P0s and sometimes P1s. And so, we're not trying to spread ourselves as wide as we had before, definitely. And then we've also brought on a lot of, we call them DPMs, or design program managers, who, keep the wheels running and help us do stakeholder meetings. And they just offer a lot of, I guess I would call it operations support. So there's less of that falls on us. So right now we're not expanding the team because we have just a more focused scope right now. So yeah, we're not actually expanding, to be honest.
So it hasn't been too much of an issue, but I guess having that help with the operations side of it has taken a lot of the work off and helped a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does. We have a lot of influx of Apple people at Airbnb. Practically, gosh, the whole C-suite now is former Apple, and they have a very big perspective on operations. And so at Apple, like, they have these people called, I think they call them producers, but a huge team of operations people that really keep the whole thing running. And so they feel like that creates efficiency, where you can just allow, which I agree, you can just allow your writers to totally focus on writing.
Yeah.
They don't have to do a lot of other stuff. So, it's a new thing for us, and we'll see how it goes.
I'm a big advocate, well, being like in an ops role at the moment, I'm a big advocate for that, because you're just enabling the teams to just get on with the job and stop having to, remove barriers and sort problems out all the time. They can just get on with it. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. And Connie, how about you expanding the team at TikTok? How do you make the case for sort of resource? How do you know when the time's right to scale, and how to kind of get that investment?
Yeah, actually, in a lot of ways, it's similar to what Joni was saying, because I think for us, it was more that like the more focused and the more we had to say no to things, we could almost have other folks make the case for us. So if they were like, oh, well, I don't have a UX writer for this particular vertical or this particular PRD I'm putting together, it was like, oh, okay, it sounds like you need one. Like you clearly like have a case for it because you have this like set of OKRs you're trying to kind of achieve in this time period. So let's use that as a case for building the team, because it sounds like you need someone and you're the one saying it. It's not just coming from me going to my manager and saying like, we need more people. And he's like, I think you all can do the work. It's actually like we have to say no to some things so that other folks will also make the case for us. And that's been really helpful.
Yeah, I definitely learned that the hard way when I was in a small team, because I would try and just do everything with what I had, which at one point was pretty much just me. And then you kind of just set a precedent that you're all coping and you're all fine. And until you start saying no, no one really listens, because they're like, oh, she's fine, you can just do it. I can see you nodding along there, Patricia. You've been in that situation.
Yeah, in my case, I'm finding it really useful to have other people ask for resources instead of you. Because you know, if you say no to a certain team because you don't have any capacity, then they go and find the case for you. You know, so they are just doing the work for you. Like in my case, we are a central team, but I made the conscious decision to just work on Candy Crush, the biggest game, because I wanted to start the craft and build the foundations in the biggest game. And once everything was running smoothly in Candy, then I will consider rolling it out to other games, but only if the UX maturity conditions are met in the game. So I'm being like maybe too picky about this, because I don't want to spread the team like too thin and say yes to everything, because I learned that hard lesson in my previous job. I was saying like, yeah, of course, we'll help you with that. And I learned that was not the best idea. So now I'm a little bit more selective, and I try to embed the team in those teams or projects where I know that they will have a greater impact.
And so I guess if a new project springs up and you're like, well, actually, you can spring up a new project, but I don't have anyone for it. So if you want someone on that project, then you need to hire. Yeah, simple as that. Cool. So I think you're kind of in a centralized team, aren't you, Patricia? So how do you sort of balance the demand between kind of content designers to go and like be embedded on projects like that, or product teams, and work in an agile process, but then have those kind of demands coming in from other areas of the business? How do you balance that?
So we are now focusing on Candy Crush only, but within Candy Crush, UX writers are embedding themselves in specific teams. So we also have this situation where we get requests from other areas that where we are not like fully embedded. So I normally have like a discussion with the producer or the designer and identify what the impact of the project will be. And again, I'm pretty selective about projects, because I don't want to say yes to everything, but at the same time I don't want to say no too much, because then we will be missing out on opportunities. So it requires a lot of like team communication to actually be transparent about the capacity that we have and make like team decisions in case we want to say yes when we should be saying no.
Yeah, it's so hard, isn't it? Because you don't want people to just go off and do their own content, but at the same time you can't say yes to everything.
Yeah, for example, this morning I had someone from Soda, which is a different game from Candy Crush, telling me, hey, since we don't have a UX writer for Soda, we decided that UX designers can write the copy and then someone else can review it. And although I know this is not ideal, I had to stop myself from saying I'm going to help you, because no, we are not going to help you. We're going to let you fail. so that then you come to me and ask me for like a real UX writing resource.
Yeah, just like, see what happens, because it's so tempting to just go, no, don't do that. But yeah, you've got to let some things go, haven't you? Joni, am I right in thinking that you centralized your team super recently as well?
Yeah, we did. And exactly what Patricia said, every intake, you just got to kind of say, can content make a difference here? And what is the actual priority of this for the business? The other thing that we did recently was onboard an agency of record for UX writing. So if there is something really big that I can't staff, I would bring in a contract worker, which, I don't love, but it is a way to expand and contract as needed. And a lot of times, the designers have budget to go get a design agency, but they don't ask for a writer, or the writer they give you is maybe not a UX writer. They're more of a marketing copywriter or something. So, I mean, not that there's anything wrong with marketing copywriters, but doesn't fit the need, right? So I kind of went off and said, I'm going to get my own agency of record so that I can get high quality talent when I need it. So yeah, we just kind of pull them in as needed.
Yeah, we've done that actually. We've had a few contractors in and it's sort of had varying degrees of success, I guess. It always depends what kind of work they're doing. And some of them ended up staying, permanently. So that's been successful in some ways, but probably not a cost-effective way to resource the team. So do you have like with the sort of triaging that you've talked about, kind of, I guess, looking at kind of priority and demand and things like that, do you kind of have is that documented in a sort of formal triage process, or is it quite an informal thing? Connie, I think you've mentioned you might have a tool that you use for this in your organization.
Yeah, we have an internal like project tracking tool. So UX writing is like one of the nodes, I guess, along the different steps that has to be signed off on. But then we also use Asana just to also do some requests intake. Why we use two tools is not an interesting story.
And it works quite well, does it?
It works, yeah, it works relatively well for the most part.
I guess there must be occasions for all of you where you do have to, I mean, you talked about that one where the UX team were just going to put the content in, but there must be occasions where you've just got to say no and let things go and sort of, silently crying inside that something's going out because that hasn't been created by content designers. Does that happen?
Yeah, that does happen. And it can be a little bit painful because I do think, and I feel like this happens with all the folks on our team. Everyone just wants to like support whatever project they can. But I always worry that they'll overextend themselves. So I almost like to have as clean of a break as possible. So instead of us doing like a lightweight thing like office hours or something, it's like, let's just have a very clean break so we know where the boundaries are. And need more resources, then we can get it and support them fully instead of only spending like 10% of our efforts on like a project.
Yeah, I guess that's the way to make sure that people are only doing deep work and adding real value rather than just doing kind of surface level.
Yeah, I totally agree, Connie. Like clean break. I gave up on office hours. Number one, nothing's ever an extra small that can be accomplished in an hour. That's never true. And it does, it adds complexity that I think is dangerous to a certain extent.
Do you get that at King at all, where people are just like kind of, I've just got a quick thing, and then it's just like not at all. It's like when you start unpicking it, it just snowballs into this huge project that you wish you'd never got involved with.
Exactly. It happens many, many times that you think that, yeah, it's going to be just a half an hour work, but then, the team or the UX writer start asking questions. And the more questions the UX writer asks, then the team realizes like, I think maybe we didn't approach this correctly from a design perspective. So then it's the time where we need to decide whether we want to kind of like work fully with the team to improve it totally, or if they don't have the time, we prefer not to be involved in just fixing whatever, because in the end it's going to be like our team name on it. So, you know, sometimes you have to make those decisions. It's like, if you want to do like, if you want like great work, these are the things that we need to improve in the design. If not, you know, talk to us next time.
Yeah, I sort of always hope that the more that happens, the more people realize that maybe they need a content perspective much earlier on. But I do sometimes think, like, do people ever learn about this? After they just, yeah, it's a tricky one to crack, isn't it? Like, I love the way you're like, no, we're not putting our names on that. You can let that go. We're not having anything to do with it. I like that one. So how, I mean, in that sort of vein, like, how do you deal with I guess not being invited to those key meetings up front where content should have been included, and then isn't, and then, you know, you do have to kind of end up unpicking a lot of stuff later on, or asking all these questions later on? How do you deal with that, Connie?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think especially when I was more junior, I would always take it personally. And like when I dug into it more, I'd find out like, oh, everyone just thinks they don't want to bother you. So they're like, I'll just loop you in later. You can just review it really quickly. And what I, you know, have to kind of tell them is like, I totally get how that's very well-meaning, but it is thoroughly misguided, because it ends up being just so much more work for the writer when they're looped in later. Because I would say, like, I don't know, 80 to 90% of our work is just like even understanding the context of where the user is at before we like write anything. And I think, I know we've talked about this earlier on in the panel, but at the leadership level, it's just also making sure folks know what opportunities there are to be more strategic and more effective when a writer is actually included. So the things we kind of talked about earlier, like putting together, you know, frameworks, or addressing maybe localization concerns early, researching common patterns in UI content, reducing jargon, working with a legal team, you know, to refine the content. And then with my ICs, my advice for this is usually just super straightforward. If you're not already included, then just ask to be. Obviously, I should also be doing that as their manager, but you know, they should also, you know, if they see an opportunity to be involved, they should ask the person why they aren't. It's kind of embarrassing, I know, but I think it's really putting the onus on the person who like didn't include them to explain why they shouldn't join. And it's very rare that I think they have a good reason. So, you know, if there is one, I'd love to hear it.
How about you, Joni? How do you deal with that in your organization? Does it happen a lot or not?
Not a lot, but it does happen. I mean, you definitely do a little bit of calendar stalking, you know, like who's in this meeting and what's it about and things like that. Again, I think we're trying to solve it through process. So if somebody's not in a meeting, I'll go to the DPM, or even sometimes I'll go to the EAs of the C-level and be like, this person should be in this meeting, you know? And so the person who, you know, controls the invite controls the audience. So sometimes I'll do that, but I agree with Connie. I mean, I think the junior folks often take it personally, and I just try and tell them, you know, you got to create the value first, and then they'll want you in the meeting. I mean, I don't mean to sound like, you know, strict or anything about it, but you do now have to kind of prove to a certain extent that we need to be in there. And it's a lot better now, I would say, especially because, like I said in the beginning, we just assign the writer to that project, and the XD or the designers will make sure they're in there usually, because they know they need them.
Yeah. And I guess that relationship building we sort of spoke about earlier helps with that. Patricia, has that helped like get your team kind of more involved?
Yeah, it depends on the team, and you know, because if the UX writer has just started working with that team, it's going to take some time for this person to get invited into meetings. And normally it's just about asking, like, hey, I know that there was this meeting about feature X, and can you invite me next time? And normally what happens is that when the UX writer gets involved and start asking questions, they go like, we didn't think about that. And then this is when they realize that they need to involve the UX writer earlier to actually ask like questions that no one else is asking, and also connecting the dots with other features from other teams, because normally the team has has the ability to oversee features coming from different teams, and they can help pinpoint some misalignments or inconsistencies that the teams themselves cannot see because they work in isolation sometimes.
Yeah, it can be really hard though, I think, when people are left out of those conversations, and then those decisions kind of have been made and they've like affected the content, and the content could have played that kind of key role in driving those decisions, but it was made without them, and then they're just like putting a bit of a sticking plaster over poor design decisions. It can be quite sort of demoralizing for the UX writers and content designers. So how do you I know you sort of talked about, I know Joni, you sort of mentioned that, sort of reiterating to them, you kind of need to add the value and then they'll invite you, but in that instance they've not been able. It's kind of like I feel like you get into a bit of a content trap, because you can't add the value because you're not brought in early enough, and then because you're not brought in early enough, like it's just sort of a bit of a circle, a horrible circle that you get into. And I can see why content designers can get pretty frustrated. So what sort of advice do you give team members when they're feeling like that? Start with you, Connie, on that one.
I'd say one of the things is like also kind of the foundations we've kind of talked about earlier, like all these like road shows and like, building those relationships. And we talked a lot about like us building relationships with other leaders, but obviously like our ICs are also building really strong relationships with the IC designers and PMs and other stakeholders they're working with. So I think even just having a simple conversation early on with someone, it's harder, I think, now, because especially in the US, we're pretty much all remote, or a lot of folks are remote. I think that relationship building piece is more easily lost at this point. Even just like, just doing the work of setting up a bunch of one-on-ones and like having those conversations with folks one-on-one when they know you as a person, it's pretty hard to deny you, at least in my experience. So I think that's been a super simple but effective way to kind of make sure the relationship is there so that the work can happen.
Yeah. How about you, Patricia? How have you sort of got around that issue?
In my case, I have to say that the fact that now we are working remotely was very beneficial to my team, because I started the craft last year when we were all working remotely, and I work with the Stockholm office. So all the people that I work with, I haven't met them in person, which is super weird that I'm building relationships over Zoom. But at least the good thing is that my team was able to, the fact that we now need to meet over Zoom, it democratized the access to people and to information as well. Because before working remotely, like people were used to like having face-to-face conversations, and they were leaving out people from other offices. So now it's like we are all equal. So we're just a Zoom away from having a conversation with someone. So actually, this was beneficial for my team.
That's interesting. And I guess as well, because your team's only ever been remote, so they haven't known anything different. So does that change the way that your teams have worked, Joni, from kind of going from being there in person to being fully remote?
Well, in our sorry.
Go ahead, Patricia.
No, like in our case, we have people working from Barcelona and some people working from Stockholm, and we are, making sure that all the team members are included, so not left out from. Especially now that we're going back to the office in Stockholm, so I'm a little bit worried that we go back to the old ways.
Yeah, so it's almost like you've had to make that extra effort that might not have been there if you'd been sort of in person.
Yeah, I think it's certain extent been easier with Zoom. I agree, Patricia.
Yeah.
I mean, it's much quicker to have a sync with people. It's much quicker to get everybody into a Zoom chat, you know, and we do encourage people to, rather than try and hash stuff out over Slack, like, please get into a Zoom conversation. But mostly people miss each other, I find.
Yeah.
That's been the hardest.
You can't sort of stand next to each other and post it on a wall anymore. It's all, everything has to be like a workshop, you know, like a remote workshop, which makes things sort of tricky. I've also sort of said to my team members, like where they haven't, you know, because sometimes in some instances being remote can encourage that kind of siloed working within squads, where the product design is going off here and the content design is going off here, and then they're coming together and they're not kind of doing things sort of asynchronously as much as they should be. And I've sort of said to them, you know, if that is affecting your work and you feel like you're not being brought in early enough, or, you know, product designers aren't being as collaborative, like that's what your retros are for. You know, you need to make sure you're really flagging the impact of this at retros. And I think like sometimes content designers and UX writers can just sort of forget that they can, you know, they can actually bring this sort of stuff up and say, well, I could have added more value if I'd been involved at this point, or I could have been like, so, you know, making sure that people really use that time and space to like flag these things, because otherwise it's not going to change. I think they sometimes forget that that's what, you know, retro is just as much about ways of working as it is about what was delivered and the work. So yeah, that's kind of my tactic that I've sort of just been trying to push through this remote thing. Is just like, if something's not working, you need to say it, because no one's going to fix it for you. Okay, so we've reached the end of our topics, but I've got quite a few questions from the audience, so I'm going to jump into those. So Adam would like to know what your experiences are working with copy counterparts in marketing, if you work with them at all. And I think a couple of you mentioned marketing, so I think you probably do, but does it ever result in alignment challenges with like regards to tone or approach of certain areas sort of between digital and marketing, or do you have like a kind of clear line in the sand and boundaries between kind of ownership of the content? Who'd like to take that one first?
I can take that one. I mean,
Joni, you go on that one.
Yeah, it's hard because we have digital marketing, then we have a creative team, and we have the UX writing team. So, you know, there's writers on all those teams. We have kind of established that since we're the, I would say, oldest team there, that and the one that's done the most work on establishing voice and tone, like we're the owners per se, but we, you know, we check in with them weekly to say, are we still aligned? I meet with the, you know, head of marketing, I meet with the head of brand every week to just make sure we stay connected with them and aligned on approach. But where the issues lie is on landing pages, right? Like who owns a landing page is kind of an eternal question. So what in fact, I'm actually on the homepage project right now where, you know, there's 30 people on this team and everybody's writing different stuff. Some people are writing headlines, some people are writing the CTAs, some people are writing the scripts, so the video scripts. So
wow.
In the beginning, I said, okay, we need to sit down and decide exactly who is going to own which piece of this, or else it's going to be chaos. And that worked pretty well. And it's hard for UX writers, I think, to sometimes give away that ownership, you know, because they feel so responsible for every word that makes its way onto the site. And so I've had to talk to them a lot about, you know, it's okay. It's okay that you didn't write this. It's okay that someone else had an idea for this headline. You know, we still are the stewards of the voice and tone. You know, you may not have written this exact copy, but that's fine. So I think that's some things that we've tried.
Yeah, it's like, we're not coming for your jobs, don't worry, we're working together.
Yeah.
It's not like
exactly.
a competition. Have you Patricia, you were sort of nodding away there, have you had to do like roles and responsibility sessions with other content teams to kind of define those sort of boundaries at all, or has it been quite a collaborative thing?
Yeah, I started defining the roles and responsibilities within the team to have like a clear idea. Okay, so what is the expectation depending on the level from each of the UX writers, and this helped me also like set boundaries and start spark a conversation with teams like narrative design or marketing as well. And actually, for working with marketing, I team up with narrative design at all to make sure that we can work as a content team all together, because we cannot write the marketing copy, but at least we can help them sharing guidelines and even helping review their work sometimes. So we tend to be like pretty collaborative each time.
Mm-hmm. And Connie, how does it work at TikTok? Are you quite closely aligned to product marketing, or yeah, how sort of collaborative are the different content teams at TikTok?
Yeah, I was thinking about this one. I think there are some boundaries that we have defined, because I think marketing on our team, or sorry, marketing at TikTok, I should say, works a little more on like off-platform content, whereas we're a little more focused on like within the app or the web experience. So we do have some boundaries there. I think one area where we work really closely together on is naming, and naming is like a challenge because it can be more subjective. And then we kind of focus a little more on like using descriptive, like really general kind of names, and marketing sometimes wants to have a big splashy go-to-market plan. So they'll want something that sounds really evocative and like exciting. And so balancing that is usually where we kind of need to collaborate the most on. I think the other thing is, I think as UX writers, we often are thinking a little bit more on localization, because marketing, we have local marketing teams, so they can have a different name for a campaign and the content can be a little more ephemeral. Whereas for us, we're like, oh, it needs to be like in the app and then translated. And then, we're not like going to be constantly updating it. That costs money. So those are the things that we kind of have to align on the most. But I agree a lot with what Joni said. I thought that was super smart about like, it doesn't really matter who owns something. At the end of the day, someone super smart told me, you just want to focus on what is the best decision, not on who owns anything. So I think that's a really good attitude to have going into these discussions.
Yeah, I agree. Although I think it is sometimes hard to convince people who maybe have maybe especially in non-digital companies where UX writing or content design is quite a new thing for marketing teams to get their head around. They're like, well, we've always written the copy. Why? Who is this new team? What are they doing? And I think in those cases, what I found worked quite well is to do like sort of workshops with them and come up with some like shared principles and get them to understand that you're all working towards the same goal. Like you sort of saying about, it's not about who owns it, it's about that we're all trying to do the same thing, which is to get people in, get them to use our product or buy our products. And it's like kind of going in like, hands up, like non-threatening. We're not here to like take your jobs. We're doing a different kind of content, but it can complement each other. It shouldn't be, it's not a competition. It's like, we should be working kind of together and complementing each other. But yeah, it can be quite tricky.
I think another thing. Oh, I was going to add one more thing.
Yeah, carry on.
To your point about localization, Connie, I think accessibility standards, there's another place where the marketing people don't understand that. And so as the stewards of the standards, I just find that we can really lean in there, because nobody else wants to, it's a lot of work to document and keep track of all the standards on a site. And I just feel like, again, we can uniquely do that because no one else really wants to, but it does give you a little bit of power in a sense, because you're the one defining and recommending those.
Yeah, that is true. I've got a question from Chan, who wants to know. It says, "Hey panelists, what are your favorite tactics?" We talked a bit about roadshows earlier. What are your favorite tactics for roadshows or kinds of sharing to educate stakeholders on the value of content design? Do any of you do roadshows, or have you done sort of similar things? Connie, you're nodding.
I think my favorite is probably one that Joni already mentioned, which is like the before and after, like when you could clearly see the difference when a writer has like worked on something. I think another thing that's great to show in the roadshow is like, I talked about the invisibility of UX writing work and having a slide that shows like, if you're writing a string or like working on content for a flow and like focusing on something different each time and like what the screens would look like each time and how that could completely change the content. I think that's been really great. I think in terms of how to give the roadshow, I think also some kind of interactive element, if that makes sense for your audience, could be nice, like having them like write content. And then, you know, you could go around the room and talk about like why you decided on those writing decisions. So almost putting them into the role of a writer and then maybe pointing out constraints or things they maybe hadn't been thinking about when they're writing the content. One is like length. That's always an obvious one. How do we kind of distill all of this important information into a very small number of words? And then we show them, you know, like, what if you had to translate it into, I know everyone always uses German or Russian as the examples. Like, what does that look like now? Like, once you've translated it, does it like still like fit within the constraints of the design? So I think that's definitely a little more work to kind of organize, but I think it can be really eye-opening for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I've done that before and it is really, really eye-opening for people. Patricia, what kind of activities have you done to kind of engage stakeholders in content design?
One that was really effective was present in design activities or design events within the company, because then it meant that we will be speaking to the right audience. Instead of like coming from scratch and trying to gather an audience, we will crash into a design event. So one thing that was, I totally agree with Connie, like when you put people to write, they realize how hard it is. But also I used examples from how content design is done in other companies, because since this is like a new discipline in video games, it's like showing, hey, but there's companies like Airbnb or Google or Facebook doing it already, you know? So it is something.
Yeah, but I just find like competitive stuff works well as well. Look how they're doing it, your competitors. Joni, what have you done at Airbnb for this kind of thing, or do you need to do things like that there, or?
Yeah, I was just commenting in the chat. I actually feel like meeting one-on-one with new people is more effective than a roadshow sometimes, because then you have their attention, you know they're listening, they can ask you questions. I don't know that, yeah, roadshows have been totally effective for me, unless somebody asked me to do one, you know, I'll definitely do one. But you know, to Max's point or someone's point, like how do you get them to show up, like what's in it for them? In the real world, you can bring donuts, but you know, so I think one-on-ones sometimes can be more effective than a roadshow. Just a thought.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, we sort of do, you know, show and tells, which are like drop-ins, and I guess what we've tried to do there is get more content designers presenting at those, rather than it just being the product designer who's showing the work. Actually, the content designer presents it and talks through the rationale behind the content, and I think that's been quite interesting for people to suddenly understand the kind of process behind the words, rather than, you know, it's really easy to look at something at face value and just go, oh yeah, that design looks good, but people don't often think about the work and the process that's gone into creating the copy. And I think sometimes, you know, if you can bring that into the meetings that are happening anyway, rather than creating kind of new things, if you can start getting more content designers presenting at those and talking about their process and the rationale, it can help be quite kind of eye-opening. Joni's just mentioned onboarding as well, and I think that's another interesting thing, getting people to understand when they come into the organization, not just what content designers do, but how to get value from them. If you want to get the maximum value out of these people, here's how to work with them. That can be quite useful, I think, to do. And okay, so Claudia, I'm not sure if it's Claudia or Claudia, has got 3 questions here. So the first one is, what if you did a good job at building awareness in your company, and you're finally there and you get a lot of requests, but now there are too many you can handle, would you concentrate on just the high impact projects? I think we sort of covered this a little bit earlier, or would you sort of find a different way to prioritize the work? That's the first question. So we sort of talked a little bit about that earlier, but I guess I'm interested, like Patricia, you sort of mentioned about you know, saying no and just staying in one thing where you know you can add the maximum value. Is Connie and Joni, would you sort of follow similar thought on that one?
Yeah, I think the key questions there are, I mean, you know, it's a matrix, right? It's like, can content have impact here? Are you going to make business impact? And do you have the capacity for it? I think those are the three things I ask. And if the answer to all those is no, I'm not going to do it. To be honest.
Connie, would you agree with that one?
Yeah, I agree completely. I think the other thing for us is like we focus on the creator and viewer experience primarily on TikTok. So the closer it is to that, the more of a priority it is for us, because we do have a lot of projects that start to veer off from that. We also get asked to work on other apps within our parent company besides TikTok. And for those, we're like, you know, here's our guidelines, like, you know, here's some scalable resources for you that you can utilize for now. But really, the case is probably to be made that your team also needs a UX writer or UX writing team.
Yeah, I would agree with that one. So I guess this is sort of similar to the other question, is that convincing your kind of director that how would you convince? So the question from Claudia is, how would she convince her director that they need more people in their team, because they not only cover content design but also localization for the whole product unit. I'm assuming it's not an option to just start saying no to things, but that's what I would do. But any other advice for Claudia there?
I think you got to talk about that situation in terms of risk. What's the risk of not hiring these people? You know, and sort of put the soul in jeopardy. Like we could, you know, a lot of times what can actually sell this is just compliance issues, right? Accessibility, compliance, legal compliance. And, you know, the risk of not having a content person paying attention to these things is you get sued. And that's not uncommon for a lot of high profile companies. So I don't know, that might be an option.
Okay, I'm going to do one more question because we're coming up to 7 o'clock. So the other, actually, it's not really a question, actually, it's from Morgan, but Morgan mentioned about scaling, and she suggested that the one thing that she started doing is logging all the things the team's working on and the projects that have requested content design but they couldn't support, so that you can show the sort of landscape of what they're dealing with and the need. So I guess creating visibility for content requests, is that something the three of you have done previously?
Yeah, I remember when I was working in Abrams, I was being very transparent about the number of requests that we were getting, because we were not that embedded or with the product teams. But right now, what I see is that sometimes we don't get requests, but since the UX writers are working with the team, you know, they create the tickets themselves so that we can have visibility as a team. But yeah, we work with tickets just for us to know what we have in the pipeline, what we are working on.
Yeah, I think that sometimes people just do need to have, I think making that work visible and showing just the sheer volume of stuff your team are working on, or you know, people want you to work on, can really help show the demand for content. And I think to Claudia's question earlier, even starting to do something like that might be helpful, is just start documenting those things that you want to get to but can't, or the things that you should have put more effort in and or more resource onto but you haven't been able to, because I think that just flags just how thinly your team is spread.
And also ask for, I would suggest to ask for help to other managers. It's like, hey, can you help me make a case? Because if you come with someone else helping you with that case, I think it's better. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, awesome. So thank you all so much for your questions, and a huge thank you to our panelists for their insights. Before you all log off, we wanted to let you all know that we've launched tickets today for our conference, which is really exciting. So we're doing a conference in March, and it's going to be the first conference aimed specifically for content design leaders. We'll share the link to the conference page in the chat, but anyone who's here and attended today can get a 10% discount until Monday. So we've got early bird tickets as well, so you get 10% off that. So make sure you get in quick and grab a ticket. We've got about 8 or 10 speakers already announced on the site, but we're going to be adding more as we go along through this year. So hope to see some of you there. And also our next panel event, we asked on our Slack group what kind of themes people would like us to cover. And our next panel event, the theme will be growing your team. So we're planning that for probably early December. So hopefully we'll see some of you at that. Just before we wrap up, again, thank you so much for your donations to Vaccinate. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you all for joining us. So that's it, and yeah, hope you've all had a good time and found this useful.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.